The Ayn Rand Institute's e-store has what you need. ARI's e-store is home to hundreds of courses and talks that will not only help you improve your understanding of objectivism, but also help you acquire the intellectual tools that you need to enhance your life. Listen at home, in the car, anywhere, to more talks by Ayn Rand, Yaron Brook, but also help you acquire the objectivism, including Leonard Peacock, Harry Binswanger, but also help you acquire the intellectual tools that you need to enhance your life. Shop the e-store today. Listen at home, in the car, anywhere, to more talks.
All right, we're back, and hopefully we're streaming on all the different platforms. I think Facebook should be up, and it's up now. Cool. Apologize for that. You know, just too many things on my checklist of things to do that I forget to do. Today, I'm pretty excited. We've got a cool, I think, program for everybody, and an interesting philosophical topic. You guys are kind of pushing my boundaries in terms of my knowledge, which is always fun. Or I guess I'm pushing my boundaries of knowledge, which is always fun. So it'll be great to get some interaction with you. It'll be great for you to comment in the chat. But, you know, the best place for your comments is if you call 347-324-3075. Let's get a dialogue going about these issues. I don't think the topic today is an easy one. We're gonna kind of march through it, and hopefully it's as exciting for you as it is for me. I mean, I think it's a great topic, and the topic really is, you know, do ideas matter? Can we make moral judgments of ideas, and to what extent? That is, can we evaluate? How do we evaluate ideas morally versus evaluating actions morally? In other words, can we say that Marx is as evil as Hitler? Hitler clearly killed, or is responsible for the killing of millions and millions and millions of people. But what about Marx? His ideas, when implemented in reality, are responsible for the killings of even more millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. But some would say, but wait a minute, he didn't pull the trigger. What matters is not the ideas, we are told. What matters is the action, right? So in that sense, Hitler's a lot worse than Marx because Hitler actually acted on the ideas. Hitler actually engaged in murder, and therefore morally, Hitler is worse than Marx, which is what we are told by the culture, which we're told all around us. Now, the reason I came up with this idea to do the show on was because I posted an editorial a few days ago on Facebook, an editorial that I thought was very good, and I thought would be kind of non-controversial. It's an editorial by a politician, one of the rare politicians, one of the few politicians, if anywhere, that I really like, and his name is Daniel Hannan. He's a British politician. He serves in the European Parliament, but don't hold that against him, because while serving in the European Parliament, he is a strong advocate for Brexit and for leaving the European Parliament. So he's not a supporter of the institution that he actually serves in, and he does everything I think he can to undercut the institution, certainly intellectually. He is a strong proponent of liberty, of freedom. I've gotten to know him a little bit. He's basically a good guy, and he has a lot of respect for Ayn Rand as a philosopher. And he wrote an op-ed, an editorial, let's see, an IBT, I don't know, International Business Times, I guess, I think, which is owned by the New York Times, which is, but it's the international kind of branch of the New York Times, I'm not sure, but Daniel Hannan, he wrote this July 17, 2017. You could find it. And the title of the piece is, "We Wouldn't Celebrate a Statue of Hitler, So Why Engels?" And he actually starts it pretty coolly. I mean, it's always good to have a good opening line, opening paragraph for a editorial. So he starts with, a statue of Adolf Hitler was unveiled in Manchester yesterday. Local artists attended the opening, and some of them wearing Nazi insignia. Of course, we don't agree with everything that happened in the Third Reich, said one of the organizers, but Adolf was a good connoisseur of architecture. He was so fond of Manchester's Midland Hotel, and he ordered the Luftwaffe to spare it during the Blitz. Right? And he said, okay, I'm playing a little trick on you. It wasn't Hitler who was celebrated. It was Friedrich Engels, right? Who was, of course, Karl Marx's right-hand man, the person who funded Karl Marx, the person who made Karl Marx possible. He collaborated with Karl Marx intellectually and certainly financially and made it possible. And he goes on to basically compare the two and basically say, look, having a statue for Marx or for Engels is equivalent of having it for Hitler. And yet we wouldn't tolerate a statue for Hitler. Nobody would tolerate that. We would think that it was an abomination, a moral abomination. Hitler is recognized uniformly everywhere. Hitler is evil. Why are we so tolerant of Engels and Marx? I mean, at the end of the day, didn't Marx, right? Didn't his ideas lead to 100 million, at least, dead? If you add up Stalin, Lenin, the Soviet Union, Communist China, Mao Zedong, doesn't that all add? It probably adds up to much more than 100 million, somewhere between 100 and 200 million. Why do we, and this is a phenomena I see all over the place, communists are given a free ride, a free pass, that a Nazi or fascist would never be given in intellectual circles. Everywhere I go. If you walk into a room and say, well, I'm a communist, everybody goes, oh, that's kind of interesting, let's chat. If you walk into a room saying, I'm a Nazi, oh my God, nothing. Complete condemnation. Now, good. I'm all for condemning and not speaking to and not sanctioning the Nazi. Don't get me wrong, right? But why don't we treat the communists exactly the same? So that's an interesting issue, which we'll get to as well. But I think the more fascinating issue is how we treat Stalin versus how we treat Marx, how we treat Hitler versus how we treat the thinkers, the intellectuals, the philosophers, Hegel, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Hitler, and ultimately Immanuel Kant. And we'll get to Immanuel Kant, the real source of Nazi evil and the real source of communist evil, who is Kant. And we'll get to Ayn Rand's evaluation of Kant and what it is. So he's basically saying, look, Marxist regimes were homicidal. They killed tens of millions of people. Why are we celebrating Engels? Why are we putting up a statue of Engels? Why are we tolerating a statue of Engels when we would not tolerate a statue of Hitler? And Daniel Hannan says, and I agree with him completely, right, that we shouldn't tolerate a statue of Engels, that Engels is evil, that Engels is causally related to the death of hundreds of millions of people, tens of millions of people, is evil, his ideas are evil, the consequences are evil, and we should never, ever, ever celebrate the kind of evil he is. And indeed, our moral evaluation of Engels should not be any different, according to Daniel Hannan, than our evaluation of Hitler. Okay. So, what surprised me, I mean, to me, this is kind of obvious. Engels is an evil bastard, and as evil as, this ranking of who is more evil than who doesn't mean that much, but as evil, if not more evil than Hitler, certainly Marx is, and we'll talk about Kant. But what surprised me is the response, and the response I'm getting even on the chat. We've got RIAX saying, he was just a hack fantasist writer like thousands of others. You can't compare a guy who personally planned and ordered genocide of millions to just some hack writer, right? Some hack writer who happened to influence millions and millions of people and basically influence history. Okay, but that, people are struggling with this. I got a number of comments, saying Engels didn't kill anyone personally. I mean, this post on Facebook had tons and tons and tons of commentary. And a lot of it had to do with Engels didn't kill anybody personally. Or I don't remember Engels killing anyone. This is silly. Engels didn't himself kill millions of people. How can you compare the two? All right, so this is the question. Does the person who pulls the trigger more evil or equally evil or whatever to the person who commands the person to pull the trigger? The guy who pulls the trigger could say no, as so many Germans get. And other people who create the ideology, who not just create it, but promote it, market it, distribute it, educate it, teach it, are they as responsible as the person who orders the deaths as the person who pulls the trigger? Right? And what is the difference? RLAX says further, and don't forget, Marx cited Adam Smith as a significant influence on his thinking about the simplest theory of values. Adam Smith, a murderer too. So where's the borderline? How do we evaluate? How do we judge? Good questions. Good questions. So let's start with, can you even say that ideas are evil? Can you evaluate ideas morally? Can you then say that if ideas are evil, the people who hold those ideas, or the people who invent, discover, promote, educate, teach these ideas, are they evil too? Can you talk in terms of morality about the origination of bad ideas? Right? So that's the topic of today. And it's a topic that Ayn Rand talked about. And it's a topic that in particular Leonard Peikoff talked about. And here I would reference his brilliant essay, Fact and Value. Now, many of you know Fact and Value, the essay Fact and Value, in the context of a schism, of an argument, of a dispute between the Ayn Rand Institute, Leonard Peikoff at the Ayn Rand Institute, and David Kelly. Put all that aside. Forget about, and the article discusses David Kelly in here. Put that aside, blank out on the David Kelly stuff, and many of you don't even know who David Kelly is and don't care about David Kelly. It's irrelevant. Focus in on the philosophical content of the article. So I encourage everybody to read Fact and Value. It's on the Ayn Rand Institute website. It's one of the most brilliant essays I know. It's got some fabulous, excellent content here. And I encourage all of you to read Fact and Value at some point down the road. I'm not going to do this essay justice. I'm not a philosopher. I don't teach philosophy. I certainly am not a philosopher of the caliber of Leonard. So I've studied under Leonard. I've learned what I can learn, and I'll try to do the best that I can to articulate the case that Leonard is making in this essay. But I encourage you all to read the essay firsthand, right? Read the essay firsthand. Now, you guys, there's a lot of comments going on, and that's great, and I will try to get to them. What do you think of the mix of populism and communism in Venezuela? And, I think it's evil. I think it's bad. Is envy at the root of the evil in both Nazism and communism? Yes and no. There's something, there are things that deeper envy is a psychological manifestation, but it's fundamentally philosophical. There's a lot, do you think the Holocaust could have happened with social media? Yes, I can. There's no doubt it could have happened with social media, and I think it will happen with social media. I don't think we've had the last Holocaust in spite of social media. Keep asking the questions. I apologize if I won't answer them because we're going to try to go over kind of the argument about the relationship between ideas and morality, really more fundamentally, more philosophically, more metaphysically, the relationship between fact and value, which is the theme of the essay that Leonard Peikoff discussed. We're going to talk about philosophy. So we're gonna jump in here in a minute. Now, you can also call with questions, and I encourage you to do so. It helps me if you call in with questions. That way, I know. Like I'm used to being a teacher, right? Standing in front of a classroom and talking to people and talking about difficult ideas. And then when somebody doesn't understand something, I can tell by their expression, usually, or I can tell by, they raise their hand, or I can tell by their body language. But given that you guys over there, you can see me on video, but I can't see you on video, it's very hard for me to get a sense from you about what you're understanding, what you're not, where am I going too abstract, where am I, going over my own head, your head, whatever, or where I need to concretize something. So you guys have got to help me. And the way to help me is, in a sense, to raise your hand and ask questions. And that's by calling in 347-324-3075. And it doesn't matter. You can be on Facebook Live. You can be on YouTube. You can be on Periscope. Wherever you happen to be watching this or listening to this on Blog Talk Radio, you can call in with a question. Somebody who already has a question. You can call in a question. Now, when you dial that number, you have to press 1. You have to press 1 to get, so that I know you want to ask a question. Otherwise, some people just call in to listen to the show via the phone. But if you press 1, I know you're not just on the phone listening to the show, you're on the phone actually for the purpose of asking a question. So help me, help you by calling. I mean, the chat is great, but the chat requires me to engage in, what do you call it? We have to focus on many things at the same time. And I'm getting old, and it's getting harder. I used to be much better at it. All right. So as I said, 347-324-3075 with any questions you have on the topic. And let's quickly go to our first question here and see where this takes us. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Good evening, Dr. Brook. This is Skylar.
Oh, Skylar, how's it going?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
Good. So what's up?
On that, I know you don't want to get into the scale, the degrees of evil, but I was just thinking about the saints and people in faith. Aren't they just as evil and backwards and malicious in their way of life?
Well, good question. I mean, yes, but I think what we're trying to do today is talk about the ideas. So your question would be, what about people who preach religion? What about people who preach Christianity? Right. What about the saints who demonstrated, who live it in order to kind of spread religion? And yes, there's great evil there, and we will talk about that. I'll talk about Christianity. All right? But the answer is yes. Okay. I mean, if you're preaching an evil ideology, and as we'll see, if to some extent you're preaching an evil ideology, you know the consequences. And that's where I differentiate between the intellectuals and the rest of us, or the rest of the people. If you're an intellectual, if you know the consequences of your ideas, or if you could have known, if you just open up your minds, if you open up your eyes, then by advocating for those ideas, yes, you are immoral, you are evil, and we will get to that. All right, thanks, Skylar. Thanks for giving me a call. All right, so 347-324-3075 is the number. No matter what platform you're listening to the show, you can call in with questions. Please keep it on this topic. The topic is, are ideas evil? And are people who advocate for ideas therefore evil? Is Marx as evil as Stalin? We'll put Hitler, Stalin in the same category. Marx, Kant in the same category, although Kant is going to be worse than everybody else. What about religion? What about religion? Right? All right. So we're gonna talk about all this, and I see, somebody on the chat is talking about, well, what about it? What if the idea in your head is out of ignorance? We're gonna talk about that. Sure, there's a distinction. If you're advocating for any idea out of ignorance, then that is different than if you're advocating for the idea as an intellectual. Marx was not ignorant. Kant was not ignorant. All right, but let's start at a very basic level, because I think we have to start at the basic level of morality and the basic level of how do we differentiate between what is good and what is evil, and what in life can be categorized in terms of good and evil? Is it only human action? What can be categorized in those terms? Judging, moral judgment. What should moral judgment be applied to? And judgment generally for oneself. What should that be applied to? Right? Now, in objectivism, the standard for morality is the individual human life. That which is good for individual human life is the moral, is the good, is pro-life. That anything that's pro-life is good. Anything that's anti-life is bad, is evil. That which destroys life is evil. Now, you have to separate in terms of morally judging things between those things that are metaphysical and those things in a sense that are man-made. Metaphysical things like, I don't know, the weather. Now, it's true, you can't say the weather, let's say a hurricane. You can't say a hurricane's evil. But you still have to judge a hurricane. You judge a hurricane as, hurricane is dangerous for human life. It's dangerous for my life. If there's a hurricane heading in my direction, I have to take certain actions in order to protect my life from this hurricane. So all metaphysical things that are metaphysical in reality, that are not issues of choices, still must be evaluated. A moral person still must evaluate them. And this is the essence of morality. To evaluate, to judge. Have to evaluate it. Is this good for my life? Is this bad for my life? If it's bad for my life, what do I need to do about it? How do I respond? How do I protect myself? If it's good for my life, how do I need to respond? What do I need to do? How can I take advantage of it? Right? And some things can be good for one's life in some context, bad for one's life in another context. Leonard in the article uses the sun. It's a sunny day outside. Hey, this is good. I love the sun. I love going out, get vitamin D, get a little bit of tan, enjoy the warmth. But too much sun, bad for my life. Have to be careful. Might get melanoma, might get a sunburn. It'll burn. I'm going to suffer. It's going to be painful. Everything that we encounter in our life, every fact out there in the world, from a scientific fact to a fact about the weather, to a fact about other people, to everything, every piece of knowledge that we have has to be evaluated. Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? This is what it means to take one's life seriously. This is what it means to make my life a standard, because the fact is, every fact out there has an implication for your life. I mean, even even scientific theories, right? Scientific theories have an impact on one's life. I don't know. The theory of evolution, is this good for my life? Is it bad for my life? Does it have implications? Does it have implications in terms of my diet? Does it have implications in terms of health? Does it have implications in terms of how I should live or not live? It must have, right? Because it tells us it's knowledge about the human body and how it is that it is the way it is, and how it changes and how it evolves. Everything. I mean, again, Leonard uses gravity, right? Law of gravity has huge implications. Don't jump out of the airplane without a parachute. So every fact out there, every piece of knowledge there's no such thing as just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. Everything needs to be judged. Everything needs to be evaluated. Everything needs to be thought about. I mean, everything within the context of your life and the importance of that fact to your life. You don't have to study everything that you hear and figure out everything. You can't spend your life just immersed in trying to figure out every single fact out there. But the more relevant it is to your life, the more it must be evaluated, judged, and you have to adjust your actions based on your evaluation of that fact. Every fact has a value implication. Every fact has a value implication. Because your life is the standard, and because every fact out there has some relevance to your life. Right? Everything is integrated. Knowledge is integrated. Life is integrated. The world out there is integrated. There's no real knowledge that is so separate than everything else that it's irrelevant to everything else. Right? All right, as Leonard puts it, everything. Now, part of what we do when we evaluate facts, let me just put this point again, a Leonard point, is the most important evaluation we must make of facts, of knowledge, is it true or is it false? Is it true or is it false? Again, if life is our standard, then true knowledge is valuable to us. True knowledge has implications for our life. If it's false, it's something to be avoided. It's something negative in our life, right? The evil is a type of falsehood, right? Evil is the anti-life. Evil is what wants to destroy our life. If truth is about living, if truth is about the knowledge required in order to live, what we want is to identify what's right, to identify what's wrong, to identify truth, to identify falsehood, reject the false, embrace the true. All right. As Ayn Rand put it in the Objectivist Ethics, knowledge for any conscious organism is the means of survival. To a living consciousness, every is, that is, every piece of knowledge, every fact, implies an ought. Therefore, it's incumbent on us to figure out what is, and what is presented to us as an is actually false, to be rejected, because we need to be able to differentiate. If we can't differentiate, we can't pursue our values. We can't choose our values. We can't define our values. Values is that which one gains to gain or keep, acts to gain or keep. What do we want to gain or keep? Those things that promote our life. Those things that are good for us. What do we want to avoid? What do we want to reject? What do we want to get rid of? What are disvalues? Those which hurt our life. Those which are anti our life. So we have to know. We have to evaluate the facts of reality based on their truth or their falsehoods. Falsehoods are bad for us because they are anti-life. Right? If somebody tells you, don't worry, gravity doesn't apply when you jump out of an airplane, that's pretty bad for your life. If you act on it, pretty bad. That is not knowledge. That is falsehood and is evil, because to the extent that you would act on it, something awful is going to happen to you, right? All right. So everything is about evaluating. All life is about evaluating. To a rational person, to a moral person, to a person committed to his own life. Everything is about evaluating the facts of reality and determining, are they good? Are they bad? Is it pro-life? Is it anti-life? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? And some knowledge you would say, I don't know. I'm going to put that aside, evaluate later, don't have enough facts, right? Or don't have time right now, but I'm not going to act on it because I don't have time right now. So I can't evaluate it. Okay. All right. I see we got two callers, but if you guys want to ask a question, you have to press the 1 so that I know you're asking a question. I know I know you're not just listening to shows. You press 1 on your keypad. Oh, there you go. Popped up the thing. All right. So we're gonna take this question. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Yaron, thanks very much for taking my call, and thanks also for the instructions. I've been an objectivist for decades, including seeing Leonard Peikoff several times at the Ford Hall Forum in the 80s.
Wonderful.
But it's my first podcast ever.
Okay.
So I'm pleased to be on. And I'm one of the people who was involved in the Twitter debate over this. And, because I agree with you that ethics is so critical to a moral life, and think that it's basically the foundation of objectivism is maybe the reason why I was so perturbed at the discussion on Twitter and the moral relativism that I saw in the discussion in equating the works of an author with a mass murderer. And not only an author, but an author who had died 75 years before any of these murders took place.
Sure.
And when we do that, I think that what we are necessarily doing is collectivizing guilt and removing free will and concepts of individual responsibility from the actors. Life, as Ayn Rand told us, is all about human action and purposeful living. And if we're engaged in purposeful living, I don't see how we can possibly blame a writer who came up with some ideas. And I hardly mean to defend Engels and Marx, who were really horrible, awful people. But it is a very far leap to suggest that the writings of Marx and Engels, after all, was a businessman living in England who wrote the same way that all sorts of people write as a hobby, never imagining that his ideas would have some importance, much less the influence that
well,
they
if
had.
you read Engels, I think he thought they would have an influence. I think he believed they would have an influence, and he certainly intended them to have an influence. But let me stop you there just for a minute. I mean, I don't agree with you because I don't think that's moral relativism. I think actually the position you're taking ultimately is the moral relativistic position. I mean, without appealing to authority, I'm going to appeal to authority anyway, and then we'll try to explain this. But Ayn Rand herself described Immanuel Kant, an author, just a writer who lived in a village, did nothing to anybody as far as we know, was as far as we can tell a good teacher, a pleasant person. People like to have dinner parties with him, and so on, as the most evil man in mankind's history. In terms of moral evaluation, more evil than Hitler, more evil than Stalin, because she understood that you couldn't have a Hitler, you couldn't have a Stalin without this writer, this philosopher, Immanuel Kant, preparing the culture, preparing the world for Hitler. Now, that does not, by any means, reduce Hitler's responsibility for accepting these ideas. Indeed, it doesn't eliminate the moral responsibility from anyone who accepted Kant's ideas. They are responsible for accepting these ideas and putting them into motion. But it recognizes the fact that this guy initiated the ideas. Now, you have to understand, in the case of Kant, in the case of Marx, in the case of Engels, these are smart people who understand what the ideas mean, understand what their implications are engaged in what Ayn Rand called the source of all evil, which is evasion. Evil is not about what you do to other people. For Ayn Rand, primarily evil is about the negation of your own mind. It's about the negation of reality. It's about evasion. It's about not dealing with the facts of reality. So if I see somebody like Kant who is evading, he's already evil. What raises him up to as evil as he is the fact that not only is he evading reality, but he is perpetuating a systematic philosophy consciously and knowably that leads to nothing but destruction and death. And he does it because he's a genius on a scale and in a depth that can't be matched by any other thinker in human history. And yes, the consequence of that, because all history is driven by the fundamental cause, as Ayn Rand again identified. The fundamental cause of history is ideas. If you introduce ideas that are evil, and you do so in a way that's influential, in a way that's important, those ideas are going to have an impact in reality, and that impact, in the case of Kant, in the case of Marx, is the death of hundreds of millions of people. And you bear the moral responsibility, not the criminal responsibility. You can't take him to court. You can't shoot him. But you certainly can announce him to be an evil person and treat him accordingly.
Well, I don't think the question is whether or not he was evil. And I won't take the other side of the debate that Marx or Engels or any communist is not an evil person with evil ideas. I have to concede that I have always found Ayn Rand's particular peak at Kant to be something that I've never fully been able to grasp. But putting that to one side and going back to Marx and Engels,
yep,
and comparing them to Hitler and Stalin, which I think is a much simpler and easier debate, these people merely had ideas. And one thing...
No, you can't say that. You can't say they merely had ideas, because that claims that ideas don't matter. Merely had ideas makes ideas impotent, and ideas are not impotent. Ideas are the most powerful force in history. They're the most powerful force in human history, right? No, ideas are what shaped the world. Hitler could not have killed 12 million people as he did, if not for the ideas that were common within the German people. Never mind his ideas. He was a nihilist. He was going to kill people anyway. He was going to do bad things anyway. But to reach that scale can only happen if a culture has absorbed these ideas and are willing to accept what Hitler is doing. Somebody had to pull the trigger. Somebody had to organize these concentration camps. And Hitler was engaged in all... Hitler had to capitalize on a culture that was ready for Hitler. And what made Germany ready for Hitler? What made Germany ready for Hitler are ideas. And I recommend reading the Ominous Parallels, where Leonard Peikoff articulates in great detail. He shows the sequence of events. He shows the sequence of ideas without which Hitler could not exist. And, you know, if somebody makes Hitler possible, that person is just as evil as Hitler.
Well, I have to disagree very strongly. To take those one at a time, I can't disagree with you more that ideas are significantly less powerful than concentration camps and gas chambers. And that is what...
But what makes gas chambers and concentration camps possible?
Well...
Where did they come from? How did you take this cultured...
Who had the idea.
How did you take this cultured place called Germany, which had Goethe and poets and Beethoven and Brahms and this amazing culture, and suddenly millions of Germans are willingly taking people into concentration camps, using gas, smart people, designing weapons to mass exterminate people. How does this happen? How does this happen suddenly out of nowhere?
I think that we're talking about human nature, unfortunately.
Well, here we disagree. So this is where the basis of our disagreement.
Or Stalin or Engels or Marx that pulled the trigger.
Of course they did. They literally pulled the trigger because without them.
Here's the problem, Yaron. Yeah. You could go, and I'm sure you have, and I think your background is very similar to mine. You could go to places like Poland and Hungary and discuss with people what they did during the war, and they're very quick to absolve themselves and their relatives.
Oh yeah,
they're not responsible for anyway, by saying, "Oh, it wasn't us that perpetrated this horror. It wasn't us who kept Eastern Europe behind the Iron Wall. It's Marx and Engels."
No, nobody says that. Nobody says that. Nobody says that.
I've lived in Hungary. And
they never use Marx and Engels. They use Stalin, they forced us. It was my neighbors. I would have died otherwise. They never used Marx and Engels. Nobody's that intellectual, unfortunately.
Not for the Nazi period, but
Well, but even for the communists, what
modern
they say is,
period.
what choice did we have? We didn't have a choice. But it's not true. They bear full moral responsibility for it. But so do Marx and Engels, and Marx and Engels bear the cumulative responsibilities for all the millions of people who bought into this ideology, who were willingly pulling the triggers, who were willingly opening the gas tanks, who were willingly participating in Hitler's killing machine. All those people, each one of them bears the moral responsibility for what they did, but more so than anybody else.
They bear the same moral responsibility? Do you think that
Look,
Marx bears the same moral responsibility as Stalin or
he
Mao?
bears.
Or that Wagner bears the same moral responsibility as Hitler. After all, Wagner
certainly not
is certainly
Wagner.
an influential person in Hitler's thinking.
Certainly, Wagner bears some responsibility for being an anti-Semite, but he doesn't bear the full responsibility. But yes, certainly Immanuel Kant bears more responsibility than Hitler. Again, that doesn't absolve Hitler of anything. It just says that in order for Hitler to exist, there had to be a Kant. In order for Hitler to exist, there had to be a sequence of philosophers, of thinkers that made the culture possible. And to ignore that is to ignore history, to ignore ideas, and to make sure this happens again. Because it will happen again if we don't learn that ideas drive history, not individuals, not personalities, not collective BS anything. What drives history are the ideas people embrace and people learn. And that's why what happens in our universities and what happens in our kindergartens and what happens in our schools is so fundamentally important. And if we teach evil ideas to our kids, and the people and those kids, because of those ideas, ultimately embrace a philosophy that allows them to just accept a Hitler, accept a Stalin, accept a whatever, and we suffer the consequences, and we're going to say, we don't know where this came from. Hitler's a bad guy. What can we do? No, there are specific ideas that we have to avoid, that we have to condemn, that we have to fight against, that we have to declare as evil, and the people who initiated them as evil. So, for example, Noam Chomsky today, he's an evil, bastard human being. And he is despicable as a human being as some of these monsters in history. Now, that doesn't mean you put him in jail, but that means I certainly would never go up on stage with him. I would never cite him. I would never recommend that anybody read him. And I would, in every stage possible, I would declare him as an evil bastard. Because if we start taking people like Noam Chomsky seriously, if we start taking people like Immanuel Kant or Karl Marx seriously, then what we get are concentration camps. Then what we get are Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. And to avoid that, we have to fight against ideas, because it's all about ideas.
Well, I think that begs a interesting question, though. I don't agree with what you've just said, but let's assume it arguendo for the sake of the conversation. And let's also remember that Ayn Rand says that no idea ever killed anybody. I think it was in Capitalist, the Unknown Ideal, she said that. Philosophy, Who Needs It? She said something very similar, if I recall correctly.
Well, no idea literally kills anybody. No idea.
Aside, and let me ask you a question, Yaron.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you're right, and that ideas can kill, and ideas are so evil that they have this potential to kill, then who's going to make up the list of books and ideas that should be banned? Because if we are truly...
That's a great question. Great question.
Writing a book or having an idea with murder, which to me is really an outrageous assertion. But if we assume that that's true, isn't it the moral thing to start banning these books and banning Noam Chomsky? And shouldn't somebody have banned Marx? And since Marx basically was influenced by Adam Smith, and his own observations, incorrect observations about the surplus theory of value, shouldn't we ban Adam Smith too?
Sure, so I'll get to that.
So
one question at a time. But let me start with this. You have to separate politics from morality. You can't conflate the two. You can condemn Noam Chomsky. You can't conflate the two. You can still morally evaluate Hitler and Marx as equally evil and say, I'm going to shoot Hitler. I cannot shoot Marx, because politically shooting them is a political statement, not a moral statement. So because Marx does not violate anybody's rights politically, Hitler does. And therefore Hitler needs to be prosecuted criminally and needs to be eradicated. Marx cannot be. So Noam Chomsky, you can't ban Noam Chomsky. But you know what? It would be great if somebody put a list together of evil books in history. That would be great. That would be really good. Here are books that you only want to read because you want to know your enemy, but these are evil ideas, evil books. Beware of them. Beware of your children being exposed to them. This is something to be afraid of. This is something to be worried about. You want to know them because you want to be able to defend yourself against them. That doesn't mean you burn the books. That just means you put a list together of the ideas of the books that are bad for you, that are evil. Just like these are ideas that are counter to human life, which is again the essence of Ayn Rand's philosophy. That goes to the essence and to the core of Ayn Rand's philosophy. And again,
I agree with that.
Yeah. So you're conflating politics with ethics. You're conflating. Let me finish. You're conflating politics with ethics. And Ayn Rand didn't. And this is one of the differences between Ayn Rand and libertarians. Libertarians, for libertarians, everything is politics. Everything is about what you can do and can't do politically. But we're not about that. What we're about is morality. We're about evaluating everything in the world based on whether it's good for my life or bad for my life. And to say that Kant is worse for my life in a sense than Hitler is a completely legitimate statement, partially because I'm still suffering from Kant. I will continue to suffer from Kant for the rest of my life. Hitler's gone, luckily. He survived 12 years and he is gone. And again, Kant made Hitler possible. So you say that morally. That doesn't imply anything politically. It does not imply that you ban Kant's books or that you kill Kant or that you prosecute him in a trial of law. That is determined by whether somebody violates rights or not. So there are lots of people out there who are immoral. I would say a huge number of people are immoral, because morality is about whether you think or don't think. Morality is about whether you engage with reality or don't engage with morality. So what? That doesn't mean that those people are going to be prosecuted legally. You only get prosecuted legally. Politics only answers the equation when you violate somebody else's rights. And speaking, writing, is not a violation of rights. I agree with you on that.
Well, okay. So I think that we do have agreement on this point, because I think that if you were to declare otherwise, as many of the people in the Twitter conversation did,
nobody on the Twitter conversation declared otherwise. Nobody on the Twitter conversation, as I saw it, well, maybe I missed some.
You should check it. Many people said ideas kill.
Well, but nobody meant that literally, including me. I also said ideas kill because I believe they do, but not literally in the sense of pulling the trigger. Ideas make it possible for somebody to pull a trigger who otherwise would not do it. Think about the Germans, the Germans who pulled the triggers.
I think people do think that, but I find it very difficult to justify a position from objectivist analysis if we were to say that not only are these ideas evil, but they have the practical effects of stealing property, killing.
But this is exactly what Ayn Rand says constantly.
Right.
This is exactly what Ayn Rand says constantly. And Ayn Rand was objectivism, at least in her writing. I mean, Ayn Rand says explicitly that Kant is the most evil human being in human history. She talks about the fact that ideas are what generate the evil that is around us. And it's ideas have to be evaluated as evil. And you won't stop the people stealing your stuff, the people killing you on a mass scale until you address the problem of the ideas that they hold. All right. I really appreciate the call. And I'm glad that your first podcast was this one. So, and I hope you keep listening. And great questions and a great challenge. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, that was good. That was good. A lot of good stuff is coming out here. All right, we got one more question. Whoops, I got the wrong person. Here we go. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hi, this is Al. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you, Al?
All right. As far as like the last caller, I mean, obviously, like you said, like Ayn Rand has said before, ideas move the world. You look at the ideas throughout history, like with, religion and the Inquisition, Islam nowadays, and everything they're doing, and the ideas have more impact than anything else. Because you look at, like in modern times, Stalin in the 60s, his rules for radicals, and how that has shaped the whole Democratic Party and their motivation for all the programs and stuff that they're trying to constantly pass. It's these ideas, like you said, that shapes people's attitude and allows them to justify their actions. They don't commit actions and then stop to think a way to justify it. They have these ideas that they've been taught, that they've either explicitly or implicitly internalized, and then they act on those ideas. So I think the previous caller has just missed a little bit of integration somewhere.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Al. And this is, and a number of people are writing in something about, well, if Kant was evil, what about Plato? Because Plato made Kant possible. And I want to get to that. I want to get to the difference between Plato and Kant. But I also want to get to the difference between how do most people accept ideas? Because most people are influenced, and thanks, Al, for the call. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to get to the point.
No problem.
I'm going to articulate, try to elaborate on the points you're making. Most people don't study ideas, think about ideas, choose the ideas that they want to hold explicitly. Most people don't invest the time and the mental effort. Now, you can blame them for that, particularly, everybody should have a philosophy, and they should explicitly adopt a philosophy, and they should understand that philosophy, and they should hold that philosophy explicitly. But people don't. And so here's a passage from Opa, the epilogue to Opa, the duel between Plato and Aristotle, which again I recommend everybody read, including our previous caller who was doubting the impact of ideas. This little epilogue is amazing, but of course if you really want to understand the role of ideas, particularly with the Nazis, the book to read is The Ominous Parallels. I strongly recommend The Ominous Parallels. But here's just a little bit out of the epilogue, which I think is indicative. The men who are being influenced retain the faculty of volition, but most are innocent of explicit philosophy and do not exercise their power to judge ideas. It's beyond them. They don't get involved in it. Unwittingly, they take whatever they are given. The fact is that most people are not going to challenge Karl Marx. They're not going to challenge Kant. They're not going to challenge Hegel. They're not going to challenge the thinkers that perpetuate these ideas, that introduce these ideas into culture, and then support and perpetuate them into that culture. Most people just absorb the ideas. And then once those ideas absorbed, their actions follow from those ideas. Most Germans didn't consciously articulate a philosophy that led them to participate in the slaughter of 12 million people. They accepted ideas that made it possible for them to reach a point where they would follow orders. They would accept what the intellectuals of that time, of that point, were going to give them. And particularly what they found appealing was an appeal to race, an appeal to collectivism, an appeal to sacrifice, because they had been prepared for that by 100 and 150 years of philosophy that told them their life as individuals was worthless, their conceptual faculty, their reasoning ability was impotent, which is what Kant teaches us. It does not teach us about reality as reality is. That their only moral responsibility is duty, is to follow duty. And since there are no categorical imperatives, they have to find their duty outside of themselves, whether in the nation, in the race, or in the Führer. That is what makes Nazis possible. There are no Nazis without Kant. There are no Nazis without a whole string of intellectuals from Kant onwards, until Hitler exploits that fact. Hitler and his entire regime exploit that fact in order to bring about the Holocaust and World War II and everything that happened during that period of time. Right? Yes, and communists and Nazis are really the variant of the same evil, but it's not just collectivism. It's a particular evil form of collectivism, even more evil than regular collectivism, if you will, right? Now, posting that Ayn Rand saying evil ideas are dangerous only by default of men advocating better ideas. Absolutely. Absolutely. But how do you hold then the moral evaluation of the people who are not defaulting on good ideas, not just defaulting on good ideas, evading good ideas, adopting, embracing, articulating, teaching, promoting evil ideas, the destruction of human knowledge, which is what Kant does, the destruction of the morality of self-interest, which was the destruction of the Enlightenment, everything which is what Kant does. Again, he in and of itself is not dangerous, but the fact is that he is dangerous because people take him seriously, right? And as Ayn Rand points out, what makes these ideas particularly dangerous, what makes them particularly efficacious in reality. Efficacious in reality is a bad way to term it, right? Because all these ideas are doing are destroying in reality. But they work in the sense that they actually destroy in reality. What makes that possible, yes, is good ideas not advocating better ideas. There were no better ideas in the time of Kant. Or if there were, there was nobody advocating for them. They were, Kant was alone. There was nothing in Europe as good and as powerful, as convincing, and as consistent, and as integrated as Kant philosophy. And therefore, the better ideas, the men advocating the better ideas, weren't up to the challenge. They were not up to the challenge until Ayn Rand to really have an impact on the course of history. Kant did. The fact is, Kant did. And he needs to be held accountable for that. Not held accountable in the court of law, but held accountable in the court of morality. In the court of our personal evaluations of who are the good guys in history and who are the bad guys in history. All right, I'm going to take a break, and we're going to do more of these breaks in the future. We're actually going to introduce advertising into the show because I want to monetize this. I can actually make some money off of these shows, not so much on Facebook Live, which is a problem, but on other platforms like YouTube and on Blog Talk Radio. So I'm going to take a short commercial break, and we will be right back after these messages.
If you like what you hear on the Yaron Brook Show and want to engage more with host Yaron Brook, be sure to follow him on Twitter @Yaron Brook and YouTube @YBrook. You can also sign up for show updates at Blog Talk Radio. Simply search The Yaron Brook Show.
The critics of income inequality say they are for social justice. But what does that mean? It means that if you are really productive, if you work hard, create a lot of wealth, and make a lot of money, you're doing something bad. You're creating inequality. So what's fair? Well, some say what's fair is to have the government take a bunch of your money and give it to other people. Why do these people deserve to be given money from others? The answer is because they didn't create much wealth. That's what it all comes down to. Social justice says we should punish people who have done nothing wrong for the sake of people who have not been wronged. On the other hand, justice says we should only punish people for the wrong they've done to others. For more on inequality, see the new book by Yaron Brook and Don Watkins, Equal is Unfair, America's Misguided Fight Against Income Inequality, out in bookstores everywhere on March 29th. For more information, go to equalisunfair.com. That's equalisunfair.com.
Rise and Fall, a new podcast from the Ayn Rand Institute, explores the power philosophic ideas have to shape the world and our individual lives. In each episode, host Amanda Maxim chooses a theme and then digs into the Ayn Rand Institute audio archives. That's where every lecture, radio program, course, and Q&A from objectivist voices that were caught on tape over the past 50 years wait to be uncovered. She takes these gems and weaves them together with commentary and original interviews. The topics of these podcast briefs are varied, from genetically engineered mosquitoes to Christmas, from Islamophobia to courtroom justice. But no matter the topic, Rise and Fall looks at many subjects through the lens of philosophy, namely how ideas move and shape the world. Listen today at AynRand.org/riseandfall. One woman, one microphone, one key to the Ayn Rand Institute audio archives.
For 30 years, the Ayn Rand Institute has been on the front lines of the culture wars, introducing millions of students to Ayn Rand's books and ideas, educating young intellectuals who now teach at universities around the world, and speaking out in defense of free speech, free markets, free minds. You can join their battle for reason, individualism, and capitalism around the nation by making your contribution today at AynRand.org/support. That's AYNRAND.org/SUPPORT.
All right, lots of good comments during the commercial break. I was reading through the comments, which is great. So let me just respond to a few things. Evil to me is a word associated with more faith-based realms of definition and not fact-based. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm arguing, what Ayn Rand argued, what objectivism argues. Evil is fact-based. That which hurts your life. In other words, falsehoods, lies, untruth is all hurtful to your life. That is the essence of evil. The essence of evil, that which would damage your life, whether it's ideas, false ideas, Kant's ideas, Marx's ideas, Hegel's ideas, are destructive to my life, and therefore they're evil. Actions, people wanting to kill me, people wanting to try to gas me, people wanting to put me in a concentration camp. All of that is evil because it's destructive to my life. There is an objective standard for what is good and what is evil. And that objective standard is human life. What are the necessary conditions for human life? That's good. And what is objectively destructive to human life? That is evil. So no, evil is not an issue of faith. Evil, the fact that religion somehow has this monopoly over words like evil, I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's just untrue. It's just untrue. All right, here's some other ones from the caller from earlier. Where was it? It disappeared on me. Oh, yeah. How do you explain the slaughter of 50 million people in China by Mao? Not a place where Kant was influential. Really? Really? Kant wasn't influential in China? What are you talking about? The people who ran the Chinese Communist Party were all educated in places like Moscow or in the West. And who were they educated by? They were educated by Marxists. And what is Marx, if not a direct descendant intellectually from Kant? He is, So, absolutely, the murder of 50 million people, 60 million people under Mao is directly related to Kantian philosophy, to Marxist philosophy, to German Romantic philosophy. And the influence of German Romantic philosophy was huge. Now, let me also say that just because Kant was an incredibly evil, according to Ayn Rand, the most evil person in history, she had a deeper understanding of Kant than I do. I can't say that claim without, I just can't, other than relying on her, because I don't know enough about philosophy and history. But I believe her. She's been pretty reliable in my life so far. That doesn't mean that every murder in every place around the world was related to Immanuel Kant. But in the case of China, Of course it was. And I'll give you another example, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Where did they go to school? Where did they get the ideas that led them to slaughter 40% of their own population? 2 million people out of 5 were slaughtered by the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Where did they get those ideas? In Paris, where they studied with the great, egalitarian philosophers, the existentialists, who are the heirs of whom? Of the Marxists. Who are the heirs of whom? The Kantians. So in the West, you cannot find a real significant evil that one cannot link back to Kant. And hold him morally culpable, not legally culpable. You can't equivocate between morality and politics. I keep saying this, but people can't think in those terms. I know a lot of people that are immoral. Why are they immoral? Because they don't use their minds, because they don't take their life seriously, because they don't dedicate themselves to the pursuit of their own flourishing. But you don't put them in jail for that. But then you take a university professor who is constantly on university campuses preaching that the human mind is impotent, that race is what matters, that all that matters is race. And that if you're in the wrong race, you're a victim. And if you're in another race, you should be ashamed of yourself, and you should have guilt, white guilt or brown guilt or green guilt, whatever, right? Doesn't matter what race. These people are evil, and you have to declare them as evil. And then when those students go out and riot and pepper spray people, well, you hold the professor morally culpable. Not legally culpable. You put the kids in jail, because we don't even do that, because we're so appeasing, we let them get away with it. But you put the kids in jail, the ones who pepper sprayed, the one who beat other people up. But you hold the professor morally accountable, and you condemn them, and you condemn their ideas, and you argue against them. But to not hold the professor morally culpable for the violence that their students have perpetrated, violence motivated by the ideas the professor has taught, is bizarre. Completely bizarre. Now, we are committing the sanction of the victim if we don't speak up, if we don't argue against them. And it's true that university professors who teach this crap and who are motivating these students to behave in the way they are can only exist and thrive and be successful because the good professors, the people who hold good ideas, and we out there in the world are too silent. We don't condemn them. We don't fight against the evil everywhere we see it. We are way too passive, particularly in academia. So evil succeeds because, as Ayn Rand said, because the good is silent. But the fact that we're silent doesn't whitewash the fact that they are bad, that they are evil, and that their ideas are evil, and they, as human beings, these professors are evil. Because of the ideas that they hold and that they teach. These ideas are nihilistic, they're destructive. Now, let me make this point. I know I've got at least one other caller, but let me make this point because it's an important point. I want to make sure I get to it. Right? What's the difference between Plato and Kant? And I'm not going to get into a whole, Plato and Marx, right? A whole thing about Kant, because again, I read Fact and Value, read Ayn Rand's analysis of Kant to get the sense. But what's the difference between Plato and Kant? Because yeah, in a sense, and as Leonard Peikoff's epilogue says, all the bad ideas in Western civilization have their origins in Plato. But why don't we hold Plato quite as morally culpable as we hold Kant? Because the essence of the evil is, the degree of evil, is a consequence of how much you know your ideas are destructive. The extent to which you have the evidence, you have the ability to know that the facts around you, that the facts contradict the ideas that you hold. Plato comes so early in the history of philosophy but not just in the history of philosophy, in the history of mankind, in the history of civilization. You can't blame Plato, for having the wrong answers. He asks the right questions. He comes up with the wrong answers. But there's not a lot of historical evidence. There's not a lot of other philosophers challenging him. He's early. He's kind of first on the scene, or one of the first on the scenes. And there are such things as errors of knowledge, errors of ignorance. You don't evaluate an error the same way you evaluate an evasion or a conscious choice to advocate for destructive ideas. Noam Chomsky was an apologist for the Khmer Rouge after he knew the Khmer Rouge had slaughtered 2 million of their own people. The massive evasion that's involved in, right? Well, it's not evasion because he knew it, right? The massive evil that is involved in recognizing that your ideas are leading to destruction, leading to death, and defending them in spite of it. Plato, I don't think, knew the extent to which his ideas were destructive. And he was struggling, and even there, his ideas are not as destructive as Kant's because he's not as consistent as Kant. He still strives towards some kind of utopia. He still strives towards human happiness. He still strives towards people achieving some form of happiness. He's wrong, and therefore is the enemy intellectually, and therefore his ideas, in terms of implementing them and integrating them into your life, should be avoided. But he's not at the same level of somebody who comes 2,000 years later, who has a knowledge of history, who has all the philosophical discussions that happened up until that point, who knows so much about the world around them, who's lived and sees history playing out. Kant, I mean, oh my God, Kant, who at the end destroys reason to make room for faith, he says, right? Post-scientific revolution, post the facts right there in front of him of the efficacy of reason, and then he denies it and rejects it. Post the Declaration of Independence in the United States, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, of real progress in standard of living a human being, all that rejected, denied, put aside. And in its place, a focus on basically the rejection of reason and the rejection of a pro-human, individual human happiness. And there's no utopia with Kant. There's no even afterlife with Kant. This is what makes him worse than the Christians. There's no afterlife. You suffer in this life because it's your duty. That's it. There's no reward. There's no something you get out of it. There's no semblance of selfishness or egoism or pursuit of happiness in Kant. He is that depraved, that evil. Now, Plato, there's Aristotle as a counter. And everybody who comes after Plato and Aristotle has a choice to make. They can choose Plato or they can choose Aristotle. Plato didn't have Aristotle before him. I would argue that Plato was more evil than I now would argue if he had come after Aristotle. But coming before Aristotle, coming before the first philosopher who really articulates a pro-life philosophy, you know, you can't place him on the same, again, moral standard, moral evaluation as you do others. Now, again, I repeat, these are moral evaluations. They're not political evaluations. Politics has to do with individual rights. Hitler violated individual rights. Kant did not. Stalin violated individual rights. Marx and Engels did not. Therefore, you've got recourse, political recourse, in terms of the police, the military, whatever you need to do against a murderer. You don't have political recourse against Kant, Marx. They have free speech, and I would defend their right to free speech on the barricades. Right? But it's funny that people are arguing that these positions are contrary to the objectivist epistemology. I mean, you can argue that you don't agree with these positions, but given that Ayn Rand held these positions, I find it difficult to view them as positions contrary to the objectivist epistemology. Okay, so politically, right, you can't do anything to these people. They have free speech, and you have to defend their free speech. But morally, you have to condemn them. And you have to condemn them as much as you condemn the practitioners of their evil ideologies. All right, we got another caller. So some people accept, and by the way, a lot of Marxists out there, and Leonard Peikoff talks about this, a lot of Marxists out there accept the ideas, quote, innocently, really innocently, particularly when you're young. I was a socialist when I was young. A lot of people, and Leonard talks about this in Fact and Value. When you're young, you can accept ideas, you haven't thought them through, but if you're honest, what happens? You abandon the ideas very quickly. It's the older, more intellectual Marxist that you have to condemn as evil. And if you don't condemn them as evil, then we've lost. If you don't condemn Noam Chomsky as evil, then you're lost. Right? Here's just a passage from Leonard Peikoff, a few passages from Leonard Peikoff that are relevant. Human action is not merely physical motion. It is a product of man's ideas and value judgments, true or false, which themselves derive from a certain kind of mental cause, ultimately from thought or from evasion. Right? So actions cannot be separated morally from the ideas and the value judgments being made, from the fact that people either evaded or confronted reality, dealt with reality as it is. Thought and evasion. Or later on, Leonard writes, in judging an idea morally, it is not relevant whether its results are enacted by the idea's originator or by his later followers. Let me say this again. In judging an idea morally, it is not relevant whether its results are enacted by the idea's originator or by his later followers. The existential issue here is, existential, moral issue, what kind of effects, pro-life or anti-life, will this idea have by its very nature if and when men start to act on it? In judging an idea morally, it's not relevant whether its results are enacted by the idea's originator or by its later followers. The existential issue here is, what kind of effect, pro-life or anti-life, will this idea have by its very nature if and when men start to act on it? Now, when these ideas originated by intellectuals of genius, who have all of history before them, who have science before them, who have all the facts before them, and yet still choose ideas that are inherently destructive, that are anti-life, they must be condemned. I don't condemn the 18 to the 15 to 30-year-old. I don't condemn, because at that point they haven't thought it through. I don't condemn a lot of people even older who haven't had the time, who haven't thought about it. You know, that's life. Most people just accept ideas. I don't condemn them anywhere near I'd condemn an intellectual. But intellectuals, particularly over the age of 30, who are postmodernists, who are Kantian, who are Marxist. If anybody's a Marxist today, after the age of 30, and is an intellectual, they're evil. They're bad, bad people. Right? And tolerance. Tolerance depends what kind of tolerance. Tolerance is not a virtue if what you mean is that I tolerate them morally. Tolerance is not a virtue. And again, I encourage you to read Fact and Value. Now, political tolerance, and that's just free speech. That's not tolerance. I don't like the word tolerance applied to this. Political tolerance, in the sense of you have a right to free speech, that is a great virtue. And that is fundamental. to the essence of Western civilization. I've talked about that before, and I'll talk about it again. And we don't have the time now to explain why that is. But the idea that tolerance, that I should tolerate a Marxist, that I should tolerate a fascist, that's ridiculous. If somebody comes up to me and said, I'm a Marxist, I am going to condemn him morally, right there on the face. I mean, I'll tell you this story, and then I'm going to take the caller. I was on the set of, I think I've told this story before. I was on the set of John Stossel, in Green Room, John Stossel, a few years ago. And there are a bunch of libertarians in the room with me, and we're all going up to give talks, and I'm supposed to talk about the evil of communism on the show. And in walks this guy, and somebody says to me, he's a communist. And I said, you got to be kidding. He's not. No, he's a communist. And it turns out he's a communist. He's like 30-something years old, and he's a communist. And I said, what do you mean he's a communist? Communism is an evil ideology responsible for the death of hundreds of people. And I said this, and I got into this massive argument about how immoral this human being was. All the other people around in the room were like, who cares? He's a communist. Big deal. Ayn Rand did not have explicitly Marxist friends. That is just not true. Now, if she converted them to objectivism, yes, but she didn't sustain a friendship with people who are Marxist. Now, notice Andre's, I'm switching because of the chat, but I would not tolerate this guy in the room. Now, what did that mean? That means I argued with him. It didn't mean I slapped him. It didn't give me a right to attack him physically, but it gave me a right to attack him ideologically, and I did. I would not just sit there with a communist as if I was sitting with somebody, just anybody who just had walked in. Now, notice Andre's character in We the Living. Andre is a communist, and actually with blood on his hands. And Ayn Rand is willing to accept that as long as he is innocent, and he's portrayed as innocent. He's trying to do the right thing. But as soon as he realizes, as he grows older, as he gains more facts, as he gains more information, as soon as he realizes that what he stands for, what he represents, is evil, he has to kill himself. Now, I'm sorry, I'm giving the ending away. But he can't survive as a character in We the Living. Not as a good guy. Because at the end of the day, what he's done is evil, even though he accepted those ideas innocently. But he has to grow up from that innocence. You have to grow up from that innocence. At some point, you have to be able to judge people. And at that point, Andre has to go. Now, he has literally blood on his hands. But even if he'd just been an armchair communist, Kira would never tolerated him beyond that stage of innocence. All right. We have got a caller. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hi, Yaron. This is Kyle from Brazil.
Hey, Kyle. Great. I think our first caller from Brazil. That's cool.
So I just want to ask the question, and I'm going to hang up so I can listen to your answer and pay attention to it. So don't you think all evil people are just mistaken or confused? Do you think a philosopher could dedicate his whole career and write several books if he knew he was evading reality and being a monster? Isn't he just trying to protect, his view of the good and attack something that in his mind is the true evil? Have you ever seen, like in real life, someone like this character in Rand's book that realizes he's evil and kills himself? Do you think that really exists, or aren't just evil people, mistaken?
No, I really think they exist. I don't think they're just mistaken. And now, I don't think they fully realize their own evil. So I don't think they actually think, I want to destroy, I want to smash, I want to kill. Although I believe probably some serial killers and people like that do probably face that. But they're psychopaths, so they're completely, there's a real mental issue there as well. But somebody like Immanuel Kant, look, people who evade know they evade. Part of what they're evading is the evil of their own evasion. But they're knowing they're evading. So people evade all the time, and they know it. It's not just a mistake. Because partially, if it was just a mistake, then you'd confront them with the evidence and they'd go, oh, sorry, messed up there. I'll fix it. But that's not the response that you get. They defend it almost to the death. And they defend it almost to the death because they're evading their evasion, right? They are, what is evasion? Evasion is not focusing your mind on something you know you should. Evading is ignoring certain facts when you know you should. What do you think Holocaust deniers? Or what do you think about suicide bombers, right? Did they really, are they really just mistaken about those virgins waiting for them? Or they can't, or in a sense they're ignoring that. They're emotional, they're whim-driven, and they're willing to accept it without questioning, without thinking, look, let's deal with this differently. Thinking requires effort. Thinking requires focus. Thinking is not automatic. Focusing on the facts, focusing on reality, requires real engagement, real effort. It's not automatic. And there are a lot of people out there who don't think, who choose not to think. Now, when you get somebody like Kant, who is using his mind in some way, but he's purposefully disconnecting it from reality. He's purposefully not looking at the fact. He's purposefully building a massive structure that is consciously meant to place a barrier between the human mind and reality. Now, does he contemplate the evil of this? No, because what Kant was said that he was doing is he was saving faith. He was saving Christianity. He was, trying to say he was a good guy in the sense that he's destroying reason in the name of faith, because faith is this. So he, in spite of his morality, he was probably hoping he was going to go to heaven, right? That's not just a mistake. So a mistake is relatively easily corrected. Evasion is not, and somebody who evades systematically and conscious and all that and a lot of it, and when he's faced with the evasion, it turns his head away. Anyway, so no, I don't think people are just mistaken. And you see that when you debate them or when you discuss them. By the way, there's a continued discussion about Mao Zedong. Yeah, Mao was educated in Hunan Province in China, although he did spend some time in Moscow. So it's not exactly accurate. But where did the ideas come to, the communist ideas? How did they get into China? Where did they come from? Come on, people. Where did they come from? And the other people, Deng Xiaoping wasn't just educated in Hunan Province. He spent time in Moscow and I think, if I'm not mistaken, Paris. Most of the leadership, the communist leadership, the people who taught and influenced Mao, the people who were under Mao, the people who executed this, they were ultimately educated in Europe. They brought these ideas to China, and then they capitalized off of the fact. Now, it's true, Chinese culture wasn't inculcated with Kant. What they capitalized there is on the collectivism of Evo. Now, one of the reasons I think that China is doing so much better than Russia and has turned itself around in terms of economically and in terms of certain elements of freedom, at least economic freedom, is the fact that China is less Kantian than Russia is. There's less of that influence of bad European philosophy in China than there is in modern times than in Russia. That's why I have more hope for the future of China than I do for the future of Russia. All right. Somebody brought up James Taggart. James Taggart is a character in Atlas Shrugged who at some point realizes that what is driving him is hatred. That's what ultimately motivates everything he does. And that leads him to go crazy. I think there are lots of people in the world who go crazy partially because of that. I think that the amount of mental illness in the world today is a consequence of bad ideas. Not every case of mental illness. Don't get me in my word, right? But a large number is a consequence of the bad ideas. And who holds moral responsibility for that? If not the people who initiate those ideas, who teach those ideas, who educate our kids with these bad ideas. But the morality of altruism, particularly in its modern form, in its post-Kant, post-Augustine Comte form, is destructive to the human mind. It's destructive to human motivation. And I wouldn't be surprised is the result is much more mental illness than you would otherwise get. So yeah, I think people commit suicide all the time because they realize their own motivation, or they realize somebody close to them. They finally realize that there's evil in the world, and they can't handle that, or they can't deal with the fact that there is really evil in the world, and so on. Somebody's asking if Plato was to the West what Confucius was to the East. No, I don't think so. I don't think what Confucius is a important enough philosopher and had enough to say particularly about epistemology. I don't think he had the kind of influence Plato had. I think generally, and I'm shooting off the cuff here to some extent, so I'm not as I'm not as knowledgeable as the confidence in my voice would suggest. Chinese philosopher never had anybody of the caliber of Plato and Aristotle. So they never had, so everybody was less good. They had, bizarre epistemologies and metaphysics, mainly forms of primitive kind of mysticism, more like religion. So Chinese philosophy is more like religion. Now, Confucius was strong in what we would call ethics, or human relationships. And there, it's basically hierarchical relationships and how to relate to people above you in the social strata and below you in the social strata. But again, he didn't have a system. Plato was a system builder. He had a metaphysic, epistemology. He had an ethics. He had a politics. I think he even had an aesthetics, just like Aristotle, just like Kant, just like Ayn Rand. They were system builders. Confucius was nowhere near that level. He had interesting things to say in ethics, some not so good things to say about human relationships, but he wasn't a profound thinker. And one of the things that inhibited the ability of China to become as powerful as the West ultimately became is that they didn't have an Aristotle. They lacked the idea of reason, the efficacy of reason. And therefore, their science was always limited. They got so far in science, and then they couldn't go any further. And I think it's that respect for reason which they lacked, which was brought back into the West by Aquinas, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and so on. But ideas drive history. Chinese history is driven by ideas, their ideas, and the Western influence on those ideas. It's a combination of both. All right, we're going to take one last caller. We're over an hour and a half, but it's a good topic. So, hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Good evening, Dr. Brook. It's Scholar again.
Hey, Scholar. All right, what's your first and last caller today?
Yes, absolutely. Is it how possible is it for someone to harbor seemingly contradictory ideals such as communism and Nazism in the same person?
Well, but those aren't contradictory. There's a lot of similarity between communism and Nazism.
In terms of how people view them, of course, the root is collectivism or statism. But how possible for somebody to harbor those? Well, I mean, I
think you see people going from one type of collectivism to another type of collectivism. They typically don't hold them at the same time because it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't integrate with them. But because they've adopted collectivism, they'll be Nazis and they'll be communists, or communists will become Nazis. I mean, that happens. A different form of statism. But, I don't know. I think people can hold contradictions. But again, if they're moral in any respect, then ultimately they have to deal with those contradictions and they have to get away with them. One of the indications to you in your mind that something's wrong and that you need to think about it, you need to fix it, and that you need to really address is if you find a contradiction in your thinking. And if somebody has a contradiction in thinking and they don't deal with it, that's a sign of evasion. Now, by the way, somebody like Hegel said that logic demands contradictions, right? And by doing that, he destroyed the whole concept of logic. And to say that we shouldn't hold him morally accountable for that is horrific. Hegel is an evil bastard. And just for that statement and for the fact that he was so influential, I mean, his impact on the world was horrific. Horrific. All right. Thanks, Skylar.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right. Okay, so we do have one last caller. Hi, you're on the Yaron Brook Show. Who's this?
Hi, this is Matthew from California.
Hey, Matthew.
Oh. Hi, I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener. Love your show.
Thanks, Matthew.
I had a question that's off topic. I hope it's okay.
All right, we'll end the show with this.
Okay, thanks. I had a question about Singapore. I've heard and read about Singapore's government being very successful taking on the role of a venture capital investor or equity owner on behalf of its people into the country's infrastructure, like the internet and telecom industries there. But on the other hand, my understanding is that Singapore is a great example of the success of free markets. So I guess what I'm trying to reconcile these two things, maybe the simple answer is that both phenomena are simultaneously possible, but that Singapore would have been even more prosperous today if its government had not taken such a heavy hand in its economic planning. Just wondered if you could explain this a little bit to me.
Yeah, I mean, Singapore has, from an economics perspective, is basically a free market for the most part, right? There are these exceptions. And to the extent an economy has the rule of law, it has respect for property rights, both of which Singapore has for the most part, and leaves the markets free, to that extent it will prosper and be wealthy. Now, yes, Singapore has also intervened and done some things that are centrally planned. To the extent that they do that, they are poorer than they will otherwise be. But today, Singapore is far freer, in spite of that central planning, than the United States is, from a purely economic perspective we're talking about, and freer from Europe and so on. So it's to the extent of the freedom existing, to that extent they prosper and succeed. And look, one can only imagine what Singapore would have been if they had been more consistent, if they had been more consistently free. The limits of human wealth, the limits of prosperity far exceed anything that we know today. So, yeah, Singapore is limited by the fact that its government is as interventionist as it is. I wish they were less interventionist.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Kid, appreciate the show. Appreciate you taking my call.
My pleasure. Thank you. And in the world, in the world, relatively speaking, Singapore is a bastion of free markets relative to everything else that exists out there. And again, not only free markets in the sense of letting business, at the core of that is a respect for property rights and a respect for contract, having a real legal system. I think they used the British legal system, a real legal system. And as a consequence, they went from one of the poorest countries in Asia to one of the richest, to the richest country maybe in Asia. But so did South Korea, and so did, and all of these countries are mixed models. They have a mixture of both elements of freedom and elements of central planning. And again, South Korea would be richer, Singapore would be richer if they'd abandoned the elements of central planning. All right, heavy topic today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you thinking. Let me again recommend you read the epilogue to Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. It's called The Duel Between Plato and Aristotle by Leonard Peikoff. I also recommend by Leonard that you read Fact and Value, which is on the Ayn Rand Institute website, so you can access it there for free. You can get access to it, and I can recommend everybody read it. Read it more than once. It's not an easy essay. I also recommend you read The Ominous Parallels to understand the relationship between ideas and the actions of the Nazis, and by implications also of the communists. And everybody should be reading For the New Intellectual by Ayn Rand, where she really explains the relationship between ideas and history, and how ideas shape history, how ideas determine history. All right. If you have questions, if you have further questions about this topic or other topics, you can write to me at ariradio@icloud.com, ariradio@icloud.com. You can also private message me on Twitter, on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And the show is on every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. East Coast time. It is on almost always on Facebook, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Periscope, on YouTube, and on Blog Talk Radio. In terms of somebody asked where will the best monetization advantages right now, it looks like the best advantages for me are Blog Talk Radio. So listening on Blog Talk would be most advantageous, but the monetization does not come from the live listens. It actually comes from the podcast listens, where after we upload the advertising. So encourage your friends to listen to the show via podcast after the fact. YouTube also, everything's monetized, will be hopefully soon monetized on YouTube as well. So, hope to make a living out of doing these things. And if you guys value what I'm doing, encourage people to listen to the show and help it get monetized. I'll also be introducing a Patreon website in the future for you to be able to support the show directly, contribute to the show directly. Unfortunately, without the ability to deduct it from taxes like you do with the Ayn Rand Institute. So you can continue, and you should continue to support the Ayn Rand Institute in supporting the show and get monetized that way. But you will also have the option of directly funneling money to the show through the Patreon website. And if more people listen to my show on The Blaze, if we can get the numbers dramatically up on the Blaze Radio Network, then they'll stop paying me big bucks, and life will be a lot easier in terms of me pitching you and trying to sell advertising everywhere else. All right, we are really at this point out of time. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all next week, same time, same place. You're listening to Yaron Brook Show.